Sophie called up to say hi, and then I go and spoil it all by saying something stupid like, I like you. I mean, not that.
Oh, fuck!
Oh my God.
Jesus!
The time is right, your perfume fills my head. The stars get red and all the night's so blue. And then I go and spoil it all by saying something stupid like I love you.
The following is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen Peep Show, you may want to before watching this video. No more Succession Sundays, lament all us Succession fans from high and low now that the show has reached its conclusion after its 4-season, 5-year run. But Succession creator Jesse Armstrong's across-the-pond opus would have a twice-as-long-running predecessor in Peep Show, which debuted in 2003. Peep Show was a collaboration between two duos, writers Jesse Armstrong and Sam Bain, crediting co-creation of the show to Andrew O'Connor as well, and sketch comedians David Mitchell and Robert Webb in the lead roles. Let's take a peer beyond the shadow of the perverse British mind's eye with Peep Show.
Let's brew this thing. Oh, fuck!
Sandwiched between The Office in the UK and The Office in the US, Peep Show debuted on the ground floor of the single-camera sitcom style that still dominates television comedy to this day. Eschewing the mockumentary format of those series, Peep Show earned its namesake from its unique filming style. Every shot would be seen from the perspective of one of the characters. With the few establishing shot exceptions, Peep Show did commit to the bit, though earlier seasons notably put in greater effort to evoke the POV perspective. There's a 3-minute sequence in episode 2 where our leads interact with, and masturbate with, objects without another soul on screen. There are extended staring at a single character sequences that exacerbate the already uncomfortable situations by putting the viewer in the character's unenviable shoes. And I'm not just praising them because I'm a Yank covering a British show who doesn't want to get mocked for how over-edited our cooking shows are compared to yours. As I mentioned, Peep Show committed to the bit in earlier years, but as the seasons progressed, the point-of-view camera positioning seemed to become more of an obligation as the show pivoted toward more traditional editing. Jumping from an episode of the final season back to an episode of the first season, it can be pretty jarring.
If two people are walking down the street talking to each other, most of the time they're not looking at each other, they're both looking straight ahead. In the first series, that's how we shot it. So you have two almost identical shots of an empty pavement.
It was, yes, just masochistically pure like that.
Yeah.
Beyond the filming style, Peep Show is defined by its endlessly quote-worthy internal monologues, provided by the show's two leads. It serves as an amusing contrast to Jesse Armstrong's later work Succession, where script rewrites were notoriously meticulous about axing anything the writers deemed too obvious, spelling things out for the audience regarding story themes or character motivations. Peep Show, on the other hand, literally puts us into our two lead characters' heads and lets us hear their thoughts. Of course, Peep Show is less thematically and narratively complex than Succession, so naturally Peep Show utilizes these internal monologues to deliver wry and cutting dialogue instead. Despite being a machine built for comedy laughs, they're laughs thoroughly grounded in the perverse human psyche, which is why this 54-episode sitcom has generated a goldmine of memorable, reusable quotes that rivals long runners like Community and The Simpsons. Beyond just the situational gags, some internal one-liners are so eminently relatable. Whether it's gleeful self-indulgence,
I'm out on a date with a teenage goth smoking pot in the laser bowl toilets. This is it.
or willful ignorance of your own emotions.
Didn't actually have to say. Don't even have to decide in my own head if I don't want to. No, I don't think I'm going to. My brain can't make me.
Or unhinged, despicable thoughts in a moment of utter humiliation.
Yeah, you won't be so cocky, Jeff, when I come into the office with a Kalashnikov and 200 rounds of ammunition. I'm probably exactly the sort of person who could end up doing something like that.
That experimental camera style and internal character monologue concept is the format, but what's the actual plot? Well, we're following Mark Corrigan and Jeremy Usborne, aka Jez, two flatmates slumming it in... flatmates. For my primarily American, Canadian, and North Korean audience, two guys what done live together to pay rent who don't fuck. Jez is a self-aggrandizing, impoverished musician without a shred of actual musical talent and more so devoted to the aesthetics and the lifestyle, while Mark is a self-aware corporate drone, both happily and miserably unhappily entrenched in his monotonous white-collar routine.
I'm just not ready for the kind of thing you're after. The whole someone to go to Waitrose with.
Yeah, I suppose. I don't want to go to Waitrose. I want a fuck buddy.
Jez is driven by animalistic impulse, while Mark is driven by social paranoia. And that's what makes their dynamic work, not just as an odd couple, but with the show's internal monologue format. I've seen so many sitcoms and dramedies and just flat-out dramas where there's an ensemble cast, but I can still easily pinpoint, yep, I'm gravitating towards this one specific character, that character is me. Peep Show is in this unique position where it only has 2 leads, yet for the life of me, I can't tell which one feels the most literally me, so to speak. God forgive me for invoking Sigmund Freud, whose theories were dismissed as quackery 160 years ago, but Jez is the impulsive id and Mark is the preoccupied ego with no moral superego to rein them in, does allow the pair to run rampant as avatars of every man's mind. Or at least every pathetic man who is prone to addiction, odd fixations, and fumbling women. Which is definitely me, and if you made it this far in this video, is you. Throughout the series, Mark and Jez's adventures will explore grifts, hustles, new friendships, but for the most part, we're here to witness the horror show that is their love lives. 2 different yet both relatable horror shows, given their 2 disparate personalities. Mark's meek nature drives him to desperately gravitate toward the nearest person with a kind smile and a vagina at his job. And in one episode, he nearly settles for just the kind smile, and desperately cling to them. And his paralyzing inability to rock the boat sees him trapped in a handful of loveless, long-term relationships he both scrabbles to maintain, while simultaneously praying Providence will somehow get him out of them. Jez, meanwhile, finds himself entangled in passionate, short-lived torrid affairs, which are often of questionable morality. Naturally, their different flavors of duplicity come to the fore when the other is getting laid, established in the first episode when the 2 romantically duke it out over hot neighbor Tony, and continued in perpetuity as each man is happy to try and snake the other's woman in moments of desperation, or even simply carnal opportunity. Which brings me to Mark and Jeremy's women in Season 1. Jeremy believes he's in with a chance with their married, recently separated, oddly intense neighbor Tony. Meanwhile, Mark is infatuated with his kindly coworker Sophie. I say kindly, I'm at a loss for words at the moment, trying to describe a character who for the first few seasons is a remarkably flat love interest. To clarify, remarkably flat writing-wise, before anyone accuses me of making rude remarks about women's bodies. I caught shit from commenters in my video on The Americans for referring to the character of Martha as frumpy, as if I was insulting the appearance of the actress, when clearly I was describing her character's production-designed costuming and role in the narrative.
I'm not a
Sexist.
far from it.
Anyways, yeah, Sophie. Allegedly, she was initially envisioned as a third protagonist with her own internal monologue, but this was cut from the show proper, and for the first 2 seasons, I'd say I'm very skeptical about this piece of trivia actually being an idea that made it far into the writing process. In the first 2 seasons, Sophie is defined by being inexplicably receptive of Mark and his rival Jeff's flirting, and inexplicably forgiving of Mark's foibles and catastrophic embarrassments, which occur on a weekly basis. Forgiving, bordering on forgetting. Peep Show has an impressively shifting status quo from episode to episode and season to season. Mark and Jez living together is really the only bedrock that will always go back to normal an episode later. But in the first 2 seasons, the status quo was also that Mark has a crush on Sophie, and Sophie possibly finds him adorable enough to put up with it. And the early episodes are happy to reset the dynamic, like full-on Simpsons Armin Tamzarian-style resets, to keep the pining going. Mark is goaded into assaulting a group of child ruffians, as in he wants to hit them hard with wood, which Sophie witnesses. Okay, that one's fine. A fun bit to end the pilot on, and if you're old enough, we all know how rough walking past teenagers on the street can be. Sophie is perplexed, but gets it. I understand. Then in the following episodes, Mark leaves a horribly embarrassing romance confession on Soph's voicemail that spreads around the office. He encounters her at a bowling alley while on a date with a teenager and gets thrown out for trashing the place while crossfaded. And not to get ahead of myself, but in the season 2 premiere, Mark and Sophie make out, only for Sophie to realize he has hacked her personal emails and has been using them to seduce her. You'd think that would result in a season of Mark and Sophie being on the outs, or Mark potentially being fired, but no. It resets the next week. She's the sweet, innocent coworker who is still open to movie nights and bungee jumping retreats, even though you just caught this man stalking you. Fortunately for the show, Sophie's actress Olivia Colman requested that the writers accentuate the negatives of the character in following seasons to give her some complexity, which really allowed the actress to stretch her legs. She's surface-level sweet, but also powerfully controlling, aka Mark's kryptonite. In the final few seasons, the writers make her a complete alcoholic train wreck, which I felt was a little overboard even if Coleman is clearly having fun. All this to say, the writers did strike a happy balance with the character in the middle of the show's 9-season run. In fact, the season 5 DVD would even include a bonus episode, recut with Sophie providing the internal monologue. Unlike her plot device positioning in the first 2 seasons, by then, the character could definitely warrant it.
I feel like Henry VIII, and I didn't even need to have a reformation.
History joke. Just laugh like it's funny. Reformation. Hilarious.
There is an interesting meta excuse for Sophie's boilerplate characterization in the early seasons, which I find intriguing even if I seriously doubt it was the writer's intention. This is a POV show, and we're viewing Sophie from Mark's POV. Mark's hopelessly lovelorn, desperate POV. There's the implication that Mark loves Sophie simply because she's there. And if he ever got to actually know her, they'd have no shared interests and he'd wonder what he saw in her. Which is what they did, eventually. But between the stories of initially envisioning her as a POV character and Olivia Colman having to request the character be imbued with more unlikable traits, seems more like a happy accident. But I've spent far too long on Sophie and the future of the series when I should still be covering Season 1. So let's touch on Mark's other love interest at JLB credit, Ellen Johnson.
And then I'm going to make you feel like you're a turkey fucker. Or I could treat Mr. Corrigan like a valued and respected customer, and we'd both end up winners.
Ellen Johnson is Mark's manager. Mark's inappropriately foul-mouthed, inappropriately intense manager. Johnson is portrayed by Paterson Joseph, and it's a shame he never managed to break into the US market as the over-the-top British guy with hammy deliveries, since Matt Berry kind of cornered the market here. He did get to play the villain in Wonka, though, and I watched Wonka just because I heard he was in it and might have a villain song. And boy did he.
Have you got a sweet tooth? Me too, fellas.
Forgive me, I'm starting to sound as curious about Paterson Joseph as Mark was about Alan Johnson. In Johnson's introductory episode, Mark is so enthralled by his charismatic manager that he begins to question his sexuality when the two become friends. It winds up being a coincidental bookend to the final season, where Jez wrestles with his own bisexuality. I mean, he traded Hummers with his friend in this season, but they were on drugs as a freebie. It's fascinating to me that for a show running over the course of a decade, Peep Show has its finger on the pulse of relatably exploring bisexuality more than any other show I've seen. For one, Peep Show is all in on just being really, really funny, but also, given the show's unique internal monologue format, the opposing force preventing them from exploring their sexuality is themselves. The Inquisitor is their own mind instead of society, and incidentally, it's the only show I've seen starring a bi-male character that isn't obnoxiously fucking pleased with itself for going against the grain. But we'll get more into that when we get to Peep Show's final season.
The thing about sex with a guy, it's like getting your car fixed at the actual dealership. They've got all the codes. You just plug right in. I mean, you like blowjobs, don't you, Mark?
I'm eating a fruit corner, Jeremy.
Peep Show is one of the funniest shows I've ever seen, an even more impressive task given its relatively grounded execution. I'm also a big fan of Community, 30 Rock, Classic Simpsons, but all those shows have a luxury of comedy wells to draw from. Meta humor and elaborate fantasy sequences and whole episode pop culture homages. Those angles mostly just aren't in the cards for Peep Show. But beyond the observational humor, Peep Show does make hay with one of the more contentious avenues of comedy. Cringe comedy. I feel there are two camps when it comes to cringe comedy. Okay, technically three, but the first is a camp that just flat out doesn't like it. But for those of us who do, there's two camps. The first is here for the laughs and the drama, and the more spectacular and humiliating the situation, the better. It's all about watching the fireworks. The other camp latches onto the cringe being emotionally relatable. Even if it's exaggerated, having lived similar experiences can make the cringe comedy cathartic. Schadenfreude, as the Japanese say. But the people in this camp, myself included, feel that cringe comedy hinges on relatability. It loses us when we think, I would never be stupid enough to put myself in that situation, and if I did, I wouldn't try to get out of that situation in such a stupid way. But again, that's all a matter of degrees, which is why the cringe comedy still largely works here. Some of us are more stupid than others, and in different stupid ways. Mark being pathetic enough to pretend he's gay so he can hang out with Sophie, then agree to do a condom run for the man currently fucking his crush, is beyond the pale for me. But Jez getting drunk, sending hate mail to his ex, then sobering up and setting fire to the postbox? Yeah, that would be pretty on brand for me. Famously, Jason Alexander had this issue in the early days of Seinfeld, as he was slowly realizing the character of George Costanza was based on writer Larry David. We all have different lines of what we think is relatable and what we think is crazy.
We both know this would not happen in real life, but even if it did, no one would react like this. So you're going for something. What are you going for so that I can figure out how to get there for you? And he went, I don't know what you're talking about. This happened to me, and this is exactly what I did.
I'm sure all of us can think of an episode of a show where the writers pushed the cringe element too far for our liking. Scott's Tots from The American Office is practically the poster child of this issue, but again, to others, to that other camp, it's one of the all-time greats of the series. For me, it was a late-season episode of Silicon Valley I vaguely remember. Something about the character of Dinesh, impulsively buying a luxury car for a girl to save face. And I was like, okay, this show has officially lost me. I'm out. All this to say, Peep Show does go a bit mad sometimes with over-the-top cringe elements. And there are episodes that are very divisive. To some, it's heaven watching Hell on Earth. To others, it's entries they tend to skip on a rewatch. So cards on the table, I'm more so in the latter camp. I come and go depending on the relatability instead of watching the fireworks. And just like Scott's Tots, I'm sure everyone who has seen Peep Show has a certain episode in mind for when the show just went nuts.
There are many things I would do to help you, but digging a hole in the wintry earth with my bare hands so that you can bury the corpse of a dog you killed is not one of them.
Unlike other shows, Peep Show has a fairly consistent balance with the going too far bits. Most shows either start way too hard-edged, then tone things down, or run so long that the later seasons rely on absurdity as a crutch and it's a shark-jumping sort of thing. While the stakes of Peep Show certainly escalate over the years, it does seem to be a pattern that from season 1 to 9, each season only has one episode where the actions of the main characters completely lose me. A solid track record, and again, this is one of the funniest shows ever, so even when the overall premises lose me, there are still incredible gags peppered throughout. Just be prepared to stomach the third act.
Hey Mark, would you like some?
No thanks.
Here, eat some turkey.
No, Jeremy. It's not my turkey.
In the end, Mark is able to woo Sophie away for a romantic weekend, but Jez throws a wrench in the works when he learns he may have a terminal illness and decides to tag along. Jez gets drunk, tries it on with Sophie, who turns him down. Then, just as Mark and Sophie are about to make the beast with two backs, Jez is found unconscious in the living room in an apparent overdose. Well, it turns out he was just drunk at the end of the day. The gang's little ambulance ride spoils the romance. Back at work, Sophie tells Mark that now, out of the heat of the moment, their relationship moved along too fast that weekend and they should return to being friends. Much to Mark's chagrin, he'll have to woo her back all over again as we head into season 2.
Okay, great. See you.
The circus of anxiety resumes more anxious than ever going into the show's sophomore year. Year 2 is generally regarded as when Peep Show first truly hit its stride, even by some of the creative team, and a notable change occurs before we're even through the opening credits. Season 1's Pip Pop Plop, the original opening theme song that's also used as a leitmotif for the show's scene transitions, has been replaced by Harvey Danger's Flagpole Sitta. Yes, it's called Flagpole Sitta, not I'm not sick but I'm not well, or Flagpole Sitter. Flagpole Sitter is their word, but you can say Flagpole Sitta. Being a hit that's emblematic of the 90s, Flagpole Sitta has made its way into a lot of media, including Psych, Dawson's Creek, and American Pie. Though Harvey Danger singer Sean Nelson mentioned in an interview with Globecat the same year as Peep Show's 5th season, that Peep Show is the only pop culture item the song has been associated with that feels like a kindred spirit to the original attitude of the lyric. I think it's a great fit not just lyrically, but in terms of musical vibes. The song plays during the end credits as well, and given the last line of every episode is almost always solid gold, the song is a fittingly energetic power pop punctuation. And true to form, things are getting hot and hellish for our duo as season 2 begins. Mark manages to make out with Sophie at a party that's gradually turning into an orgy, but she dumps him in favor of Jeff when she learns of his aforementioned email hacking. Meanwhile, Jez is unsatisfied with his relationship with Tony, now that her husband has come back to town and turned the whole relationship into this uncomfortable, psychosexual, pseudo-cuckolding throuple thing.
There's only so much happiness in the world, Mark, and they're hoarding it all.
That's not how happiness works.
It completely is.
Fortunately for Jez, things begin to look up when he strikes up a relationship with American hippie Nancy. Nancy's wildly sexually explorative, deliberately taboo nature may be a bit too sexually explorative and deliberately taboo for Jeremy's liking, but he still relishes the honeymoon phase. Unfortunately for Jeremy, that honeymoon phase can't last forever. For starters, he's far too jealous an individual to let Nancy's free loving actually be free loving, and he wants to lock down a strictly monogamous relationship, stat. And on top of that, Nancy goes from sexually explorative to celibate when the oppressively repressed Mark calls into question her conflicting outlooks on sexual exploration and her religious faith.
And I wonder what the Bible's view is on you doing it in the shower and the garden centre and up the bum. I mean, that's all right, is it? That's in the Bible, is it? Or do you think maybe that's not in the Bible? Mark!
I'm sure it is in the Bible, somewhere. Probably in Corinthians, there's a load of weird shit in there.
On the outs with Sophie, who, nevertheless, as I mentioned earlier, still puts up with his nonsense constantly, Mark has a brief fling with a woman named April, whom he met in the city and then stalked back to her college. Pretending to be a student who enrolled later in life as well, Mark not only gets to have some first-base dorm room fun with April, but also gets to rub shoulders with history and literature students and professors, passions of his that he always wished he had pursued in his youth. This was definitely a deeply relatable episode to me personally, a former college dropout who also failed to pursue my passions in school. In fact, I considered doing what Mark does in this episode so many times after dropping out that I finally fucking caved and actually legitimately went back and pretended it was my first time with everyone I met. Also, this episode may seem like a one-off, but it is innocuously important to the series as a whole, as April will return in the show's final season as Mark's final opportunity to wind up with the one.
Let's do this another night.
Another night?
That'd be fine if I hadn't lied about everything except my name.
Mark's forming a connection with all these students and faculty under false pretenses leans into the central theme of Mark's storylines this season as a whole. Sure, we get plenty of stalking Sophie peppered throughout to tie things together, but the main thrust of Mark's stories involve people either mistakenly believing they have formed a connection with Mark, or Mark attempting to falsify his way into a connection with others. Mark befriends a new hire who is a fellow World War II buff, only to realize his new friend is a neo-Nazi who assumes Mark shares his colorful beliefs. After a news program uses a candid photo of Mark drinking on a park bench to caution about the dangers of alcohol, Alan Johnson mistakenly believes Mark has a drinking problem, desperately trying to save Mark from his imagined alcoholism by relaying details of his own sordid drinking past. And Mark pathetically tries to buddy up to Jeff so he can continue orbiting Sophie even as she and Jeff are dating. All the while, his closest friend, Jez, continues to get dragged along on Mark's adventures as supposed backup, only for Jez's backup to inevitably make situations worse. But the real relationship going from bad to worse is Super Hans's relationship with drugs. Early in the season, Jeremy's bandmate Hans very flippantly gives the drug that would perhaps most define his character throughout the show's run, the old college dry.
What you got in there?
It's a bit of crack.
Crack? Crack, Super Hans?
Relax. It's not blue, Peter. Have a nice little relaxing smoke of crack.
Of course, this being Peep Show, reality ensues and Hans spends the rest of the season addicted to crack. In fact, he spends almost the entire rest of the series addicted to crack, save for a handful of typically short-lived stabs at sobriety. The first season of Peep Show was certainly littered with unethical behavior and questionable legality, but another part of Peep Show hitting its stride in season 2 is how the characters' schemes get so desperate and manic that they often escalate into full-on felonies.
The secret ingredient is crime.
I always enjoy pinpointing the first time in a series with a seemingly mundane premise where the characters either commit a felony or are put in mortal danger. Jez, Hans, and an unwilling Mark perpetrating a home invasion in the second episode of the season? Yeah, that'll do it. It really does sell how far these characters are willing to go to enable the impulsive fantasies in their heads that we've literally been hearing them fantasize about.
Hit him, gently but firmly, until he stops not moving, but resisting. We exit post-haste, yeah?
We murder Mr. Rashid.
In the season finale, Nancy's visa is due to expire and she proposes, quite literally, that she and Jez marry so she can stay. Blinded by lust and love, Jez agrees, believing this is a pathway to real love and a return to the never-ending sex party days of their early relationship. However, Nancy is openly cold to Jez leading up to and even during the wedding ceremony. And Mark and Hans both conspire to very unsubtly sow seeds of doubt in Jeremy's mind, since they're both sick of Nancy always hanging around. All these factors combine to drive Jez into a compulsive affair with Tony shortly after his marriage to Nancy, only to later admit the truth of the affair to Nancy and permanently cement their sham marriage as really, truly nothing more than a sham marriage with no future. So in the end, Jez is saddled with a mail-order made-in-America bride who openly has renounced her vow of celibacy and makes him sleep on the couch while she returns to her adventurous, free-loving lifestyle. That may seem like a pretty grim fate, but after watching a few seasons of 90 Day Fiancé, honestly, this is like a fucking Disney version of a green card marriage. It's a fun payoff to the Nancy romance, though. Yet another reason why Peep Show hit its stride in Season 2. The show started to go for more bombastic, climactic finales. Season 1 ultimately ended on a big status quo reset. Mark and Sophie seemed like they were finally going to get together. Oops. Jez ruined the moment, back to being colleagues so we can do the same dance next year. Following years would go for wild finales that capitalized on the arcs of the season, usually concluding by burning everything that was set up all season to the ground in a horrifying blaze. 3 of the 9 finales are wedding finales, with another 2 involving marriage proposals. Matter of fact, 2 episodes have the exact same title, Wedding. The only other time I can recall a sitcom reusing the same episode title is Parks and Rec's 2 Galentine's Days. Jez may be in the dumps. Mark, on the other hand, finally has his day. Not only reconnecting with Sophie romantically, but also catching Jeff in a publicly humiliating position. 9 years ago, a long-since deleted Reddit account created a spreadsheet of all the times the characters win, lose, or have a relatively neutral outcome to an episode. We're at the Season 2 finale, and Mark finally nabs his first win. The first of only 9 he will have across the entire 9 seasons. And the first for either character, as Jez is yet to have a win of his own. Fortunately for Mr. Usborne, he's about to go on the longest string of wins between the 2 of them the entire series, when we get into Season 3.
You're on the edge now, and you need to pick the right way. Because one way's heaven, and the other... well, probably best not to think about that right now, but it's fucking horrible.
Peep Show Season 3 would debut in 2005. less than a year after the debut of the American remake of The Office, and only a month after the American Office's second season, that saw the series positively explode in popularity. Many American networks noted the blockbuster potential of remaking relatively low-budget, critically and culturally acclaimed British sitcoms, unaware that the success of The Office US was more lightning in a bottle than infinite money glitch. A number of attempted American adaptations have failed disastrously over the years. The In-Betweeners with only a single poorly received season to its name, Spaced with only an aborted, unaired pilot, and most notoriously, The IT Crowd, with 3 aborted pilots produced over the course of a decade. However, the earliest attempt at an American remake following The Office's success would be Peep Show, with an embarrassingly bad pilot created the same year as Peep Show's third series. Notable to the television industry for being created only a year before American Marks actor Johnny Galecki would get on the ground floor of the Big Bang Theory money train, the pilot is also notable to Peep Show fans in particular for being shit. There's the general Americanization issues most American adaptations run into. The pilot is just a retelling of the first episode of the British version, just with worse jokes, or in Peep Show's case, an oddly condensed retelling of the first 2 episodes. Inevitably, they cast generic handsome man as one of the leads, then try to grunge him up, and the main characters who are supposed to be slumming it now live in an unfeasibly palatial apartment set. This is especially notable for Peep Show, which didn't rely on an apartment set at all until the 3rd season, and filmed the first 2 seasons in an actual flat in the actual building used in establishing shots. Amusing side note, both Mark and Jeremy's flat and the Walter White house from Breaking Bad have been put up for sale over the last couple of years, and as an indicator of just how much the El Dude Bros were slumming it, Mark and Jez's now totally renovated flat could be yours for $370,000 USD, while Walt's starter house has an asking price of $4 million. And if you live in Mark and Jez's flat, people won't even try to throw pizzas on your roof, though occasionally someone may show up violently demanding crack.
Crack. There you go. Cheers.
Anyways, Peep Show's American pilot. I could go on, and I will. As far as issues with the American pilot more specific to Peep Show, the pilot largely abandons the show's format. The signature POV filming is absent, there's a non-diegetic soundtrack, and the internal monologues are largely used for narrative exposition and expositing character motivations that were plainly self-evident in the original show's pilot, instead of using them for, jokes.
And I'm like, whoa, have to say something fast or she'll forget I'm here. Movies are nice.
He interrupted me. This will not stand.
Yeah.
There's Sophie. Been eyeing her for months around the office.
That's Dr. Lucian Sanchez, hotshot surgeon. He's a good buddy, though we sometimes have punch-ups.
Alright, that's enough going on about it. If you'd like to hear an even more in-depth breakdown of the US pilot, a sadly inactive channel simply named Andrew did a full review back in 2020, which I'll link in the video description. As for all of us, we're going to a better place, specifically Peep Show Season 3. 2 recurring characters' actresses were unavailable to return for Season 3, and unfortunately for Jez, they're both love interests of his. Nancy, who would return briefly in Season 4, and Tony, who would never return. Fortunately, or unfortunately for Jez, he's already stumbled into a new, uncomfortably sexual relationship with newcomer Michelle. I've seen conflicting trivia tidbits on different sites, claiming that Michelle's character was originally meant to be Nancy, or that Michelle's character was originally meant to be Tony, but I haven't managed to dig up a source backing either claim. My guess is that Michelle was clearly meant to be Tony. Nancy and Jez weren't having sex, and while both Michelle and Nancy are sexually explorative, Michelle is sexually explorative in the more domineering way that Tony was. And Michelle also just looks more like Tony. While Michelle is busy hammering Jez's back door, Jez is frantically looking for the exit door, especially when his posh ex-girlfriend who he's yearned to reunite with, nicknamed Big Suze, returns to town. Big Suze is a relatively high-class individual who seems to enjoy dipping her toes into Jeremy and Mark's low-rent lives as a novelty. Like she's on Poor People Safari. Though there is a through line throughout the series that she gradually goes from amused to irritated by Jez and Mark's continued sleaziness. Meanwhile, Mark and Sophie are finally going steady. But just as things are starting to look up, Sophie takes a job in Bristol and the long distance puts a strain on their relationship. Sophie starts slacking at work, clubbing, experimenting with party drugs, and after a miscommunication over the phone, assumes Mark has cheated on her and immediately starts sleeping around until Mark manages to get back in touch with her and explain the situation.
Nothing happened, really. But now I think it'll be all right.
Nothing happened really. The 3 least comforting words in the English language.
Not that Mark isn't actively trying to cheat on Sophie in the first place, he just isn't very good at sealing the deal. With Sophie out of town and only a few corporate humiliations and failed attempts at cheating to play with, Mark is somewhat on the back burner until Season 3's finale, and we're here instead for the Jeremy Usborne show. Jeremy has 3 one-off love interests throughout the season, and 3 episodes pursuing Big Suze, and since one episode pulls double duty with both, he has a whole 6th episode left over where he and Super Hans try to run a pub. And as to that streak of wins I referred to earlier, that comes in the final 3 episodes. It's almost like a light bulb flicks on in Jez's head halfway through season 3, or more aptly, a light bulb flicks off, juggling Michelle and Suze, trying to rein in Hans so they can run an actual proper pub, or trying to rid himself of a sickly Mark for a night so he can woo Suze by hosting a mushroom party. It's all Jez desperately trying to keep a bunch of plates spinning, only for everything to blow up in his face and fuck him in the ass. On one occasion, quite literally. Then suddenly, he gives up on the scheming, and he becomes an agent of chaos. In the back half of episodes, it's all about impulsive, instant gratification, getting the most for the least and screw anyone else who gets in your way. Funnily enough, the Peep Show universe seems to almost cosmically reward this behavior. Things are going well with Big Suze, won't stop me from banging Mark's sister, then leaving Mark to dump her for me when the Suze stuff starts moving ahead. But that also won't stop me from banging the defendant in a case I'm on the jury for. Block the guilty verdict to prevent my new side piece from going to jail. Oh wait, she's kinda crazy. Swinging the other jurors to guilty, even though I now know she's innocent. All coming to a triumphant head when Jez is supposed to be helping Hans go cold turkey, but then he needs the bedroom to hook up with Suze, so he rids himself of the withdrawing junkie with the aid of a bag of drugs taped to a frisbee.
Have fun!
Drugs. Drugs. Drugs!
This is made all the funnier by the recurring notion that Jez knows all the things he's doing are wrong, somewhere deep down, but it's so deep down that the only mentions of morality are preemptive internal justifications that everything he's doing is fine.
This isn't wrong, just illegal. Like drink driving.
You might have noticed over my little rundown of the season there that I was throwing around a lot of stock sitcom plot points. That seems to be the MO for season 3 as a whole, starting with a stock sitcom premise, then taking that premise in some bizarre, unanticipated direction. A main characters run a bar episode that reveals the owner of the bar has gone completely insane and results in various schemes to have each other institutionalized. A Jeremy gets jury duty episode that results in him banging and then falsely incriminating the defendant. A get rid of the busybodies so we can throw a party episode that ends with the party being spoiled by a doorless bathroom and torrents of sickly shit. I think that's why I'm not all that crazy about the main character wants to have sex with the other main character's sister plot. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but the whole, oh no, she's too much like her brother, it's like I'm dating her brother angle is a pretty common direction to take that plot. Not that there aren't still fantastic lines.
Why should I have to take responsibility for my actions? I just do my actions. It's not like I spend hours and hours thinking about them. What kind of life would that be?
In the finale, Jez devises a scheme to have one of Super Hans's friends pose as an investigator from the Home Office, digging into the legitimacy of his and Nancy's marriage so Nancy will be forced to move back in with him, while Mark takes Sophie on holiday to Paris in an attempt to reignite the spark in their relationship. Meanwhile, Johnson gets engaged to Tony, but falls off the wagon during his stag night and gradually becomes suicidal, revealing his intent to end his life to Mark during Mark's Paris trip. Both Mark and Jeremy shirk their duties to check in on Johnson in favor of appeasing their respective women, only for Johnson to make good on his word and actually attempt suicide. At the hospital, Jez and Mark are simultaneously horrified when Johnson's overdose actually successfully kills him, but also slightly relieved that Johnson will take the secret that they knew he was going to take his own life, yet did nothing, to his grave. Wait a tick, Tony's back and Nancy's back and Johnson's dead? This doesn't sound right. And it isn't. This was the original concept draft for the season 3 finale, featured in a book titled Peep Show, The Scripts and More, which includes various original scripts from the series, as well as creative discussions about how episode concepts are developed and revised. In the version of the finale that was ultimately produced, Johnson's role was cut entirely. Naturally, they didn't get Nancy or Tony back since they don't appear this season, and Mark and Sophie's holiday, the stakes of the holiday, were expanded. Instead of Paris, they're off to the Quantock Hills, and instead of trying to save their dreary relationship with a relaxing holiday, Mark is trying to save their dreary relationship with the desperate and ill-advised plan of proposing. Quantocking really drills into the unspoken but obvious issues with Mark and Sophie's relationship, with Mark ultimately realizing the point that we discussed earlier. Sophie was a shallow infatuation of his when she was simply the cute girl at work, but now that he knows her, well, he doesn't like anything about her. In the immortal words of Gopher from Dorm Life, that's the problem with mystery hot girls. Once you take away the mystery, she's just a hot girl. And hot girls can be boring. Or in Mark's case, not so much boring as too free-spirited and shallow to gel with his personality. Even more than Mark and Sophie's lack of mutual understanding, Mark and Jeremy's doomed trek through the Quantocks really dials in on how well these roommates do understand each other. It's almost like they're avatars for the audience. After 3 years, we've come to know these characters as well as they've come to know each other, and begun to anticipate just what disasters they'll obliviously walk themselves into. The only people who can't predict what either Mark or Jeremy will do next is themselves.
I'll march up there a bit and try and get a bit of reception, yeah?
No.
No?
No, mate, no, don't leave. and I'm not being rude. If you go, you won't come back. You'll leave me here to die. You know, watching her across a hot photocopier, the little looks, the funny doodles.
Before you really had a relationship.
Exactly.
Mark finally has the revelation that he and Sophie should not be together. But after a night lost in the Quantock Hills, the revelation came too late. Sophie found the ring in their hotel room, preempts the proposal, and says yes. And because it's meek Mark, he's too weak-willed to shut the whole thing down.
I suppose you could always get divorced.
Oh, no, I'm not the divorcing type.
So, you're going to stay married to this woman for the rest of your life because of embarrassment?
Yes.
So that's where season 3 leaves us. Jez has finally made things happen with Big Suze, and Mark is unwillingly making things happen with Sophie. But despite his claims that he's going to marry out of embarrassment, and stay married out of embarrassment, Mark isn't going to take his own impending wedding lying down. Which brings us to season 4, where the real horror can begin.
Me and Soph, it's, love.
Or my fear of loneliness and her strong desire to get pregnant by almost anyone, so long as it happens this year.
The same year season 4 aired, David Mitchell was introduced to the love of his life, Victoria Corrin, at a film premiere. Introduced, mind you, but the two wouldn't begin dating until years later. Mitchell entered a sort of malaise throughout this period, which he details in the penultimate chapter of his memoir. Also, side note, at time of recording, the summary for David Mitchell's memoir on Amazon is the summary to the novel Cloud Atlas, presumably because another person by the name of David Mitchell penned that book. In the chapter, Mitchell describes almost entirely pausing his personal life after falling for Victoria, on the off chance they could strike up a relationship if she ever became single again. Being unlucky in love also made Mitchell resent the steadily growing successes of his sitcom, sketch comedy shows, and comic persona, feeling as if he had used up all his luck on those instead, especially resenting the comic persona, as the jokes about being a socially inept dork who can't get a girlfriend were starting to hit a little too close to home.
I'm always being asked how much like my character in Peep Show I am. I find it an awkward question because obviously I don't really want to be like Mark, but neither does Mark, so that's one thing I've got in common with him.
He noted also turning to alcohol from time to time during this period, treating it as a sort of time-traveling device, fast-forwarding life to the next day's hangover. Robert Webb would also have issues with alcohol dependence over the years, ultimately coming to a head in 2020 when his drinking exacerbated a heart condition that nearly killed him. Suffice to say, it wasn't a fun time behind the scenes for the El Dude brothers. Wait, what am I talking about? This is Peep Show. It's not a fun time in the scenes for them either. Peep Show Season 4 is arguably the best season of the series, in no small part because when it comes to the cringe comedy aspects, 4 is a bloodbath. It's like the Battle of the Somme. There, how's that for a little British history? Usually I only make American history references, and even then it's usually history about roller coasters. Season 4 operates under the ticking clock of Mark's looming, unwanted wedding, and is defined by Mark's various efforts to either cheat on Sophie, or Mark accidentally letting people know he doesn't want to marry Sophie, and then having to arrange despicable ways to get them out of the picture, so to speak. The final 2 episodes are monstrous behemoths of cringe comedy that we'll dig into, but the 4 episodes preceding those still have tortuous moments you'll need to watch through your fingers while squirming in your seat. It may be somewhat innocuous in the grand scheme of things, but the whole sequence where Sophie's awkward parents do her awkward birthday song while Mark and Jez watch nervously even beats the horror of Holiday for me personally. Standing on the sidelines watching a disquietingly saccharine, yet totally innocent, family tradition is bad enough, but it's all the more amplified watching Sophie's childlike glee, knowing Mark intends to put a bullet in the head of their engagement at the next available opportunity. Ooh, it's so uncomfortable I can barely talk about it. It's like therapy all over again.
Look, stop moaning. We're out with a man who owns guns. You're chucking his daughter, and I've screwed his wife. Tonight is going, if a bit weird, extremely fucking well for us.
Jez's luck as the universe's favored grifter finally comes to an end, when Johnson makes an indecent proposal to sleep with Big Suze, then when Jez goes along with it, Big Suze leaves him for Johnson instead of letting money change hands. Jez may have been the front man of the previous season, but with he and Suze split up and Mark's imminent marriage hanging over the season like the sword of Damocles, Jez and Mark trade roles as front man and back burner this year, though Jez would take center stage in Peep Show's most infamous episode, Holiday.
This weekend is going to be one massive dry hump. Maybe the pressure will build to the point where we actually try to fuck each other.
Holiday is the notorious Jez burns and eats the corpse of a dog he's killed in front of its owner in an attempt to hide the body episode. Widely regarded by fans as one of the best episodes of the series, Holiday isn't without its detractors. It's very, very vocal detractors, who believe the phrase jumped the shark should be modernized to ate the dog. For the proponents, the reasoning is obvious. Accidentally killing the dog of the girl you're trying to sleep with is both relatively possible and eminently horrifying, and the grand finale of the dog eating is face-meltingly awkward to a degree Scott's tots could only dream of. I agree, it is skin-crawling, but I can also see the merits of the detractors' side. Holiday is possibly the most meta episode of the show, with multiple lines of dialogue openly alluding to how Jeremy could have easily disposed of the dog's corpse at various points. It's almost like Jesse Armstrong and Sam Bain are winking to the audience, as if to say, you know, and I know, the characters could have gotten out of the situation much easier. But this is the Jeremy eats the dog episode. Don't you want to see Jeremy eat the dog? That mindset carries through right to the episode's final lines.
Did you actually have to eat it?
I don't know. I keep wondering that. But in the moment, it really did feel like I needed to eat it.
The finale takes place on Mark's wedding day, where after much emotional procrastination, he finally decides to call things off with Sophie. However, Mark doesn't want his dumping her to be perceived as a jilting, and begins frantically brainstorming tactics to cancel the wedding without it being his fault, attempting to get hit by a car or goad someone into assaulting him so he'll wind up in the hospital, or using Jez and Sophie's one-time snog as proof of unfaithfulness so he's justified in leaving her.
Did you get off with her?
No! God. Something else, but you've got to promise not to be angry.
Okay, I promise. Release the gold.
Okay. Well, actually, I did get off with her.
Season 4's wedding is my favorite episode of the series, and I have to imagine if you did a poll of Peep Show fans, it would rank in the top 5. In fact, I don't have to imagine, it's the highest rated episode of the series on IMDb, though I'd never put too much stock into those sort of things. While other episodes build and build to an anxious, often criminal, immoral, or humiliating disaster, Wedding is fueled by a desperate, frantic energy from the outset. Though, of course, the episode is building to a climactic cascade of humiliation, not only my favorite episode, but my favorite scene to boot. Mark and Jez are hiding in the church as his bride and guests all wait for his arrival. And after briefly trying to Harvey Dent his decision-making on whether or not to marry, Mark finally decides to not marry, and asks Jeremy to help him feign that he's out of town having a mental breakdown so he won't have to face the music. But while Mark's anxiety has been building all season and is now full to bursting, Jeremy has something else that's been building all episode and is now full to bursting. His bladder. Mark instructs Jez to piss himself to keep him from moving around and revealing their hiding place, only for Jez's piss to seep through the floorboards and give them away.
Stop, Jeremy. Stop it. It's going down the cracks.
I can't stop. Stop! Oh, piss yourself. Stop pissing yourself. It's not that simple. The floodgates are open.
I'm ordering you to stop.
You're big real dick about this, aren't you?
Between this and Succession, I'm starting to wonder if Jesse Armstrong has a piss thing going on. Characters are pissing on objects and pissing on the floor and pissing themselves and drinking their own piss. Like, what's going on, big guy? Through ashamed and reluctant tears, Mark and Sophie proceed with their now ruined wedding day. But after the ceremony, Sophie runs off and demands that they have their marriage annulled. It's an oddly cathartic relief in a way. At the end of the day, Mark did get out of being married to Sophie. He did it in the most painful and embarrassing way possible, but he did get out of it.
You may not play by the rules, but by Christ you get results.
So that's Wedding. A pissy, fantastic conclusion to a gloriously horrifying season. Mark may have shaken off Sophie for now, but as both his co-worker and sorta, kinda technically, but also kinda technically not wife, she's still in his life. The fun isn't over, it's only just begun.
That's the last bottle, okay? I'm saving it.
What for? In case you marry someone else called Sophie, who looks exactly like Sophie, and you don't jilt her.
Mark may have botched his last, and to date only, relationship, but that still hasn't deterred him from his quest to find the one. In fact, if anything, his failed relationship with Sophie has kicked Mark's drive to find someone he truly connects with into high gear. In his pursuit of passion, Mark contends with a new love interest every episode of Season 5. I use the term love interest broadly. One is Jeremy's soon-to-be stepsister, who is seemingly a self-loathing lesbian whose only connection to Mark's sex life is that she rapes him to prove to herself she's straight.
You said, "Stop having sex with me, please," but she didn't listen. You, my friend, are a rape victim.
It's more complicated than that.
Do you have feelings of guilt and shame, self-loathing?
You know I do. Don't load the question.
The remaining women are actual pursuits of Mark's. Fellow history buff Paula, who he meets on a double date with Jeremy, skeezy, hard-partying Australian tenant Saz, who was willing to trade a fake relationship with Mark for room and board, Jeremy's ruthless, business-minded band manager whose in-depth instructions during sex pairs perfectly with Mark's total sexual obliviousness, and even his own wife, whom Mark finally has enjoyable sex with for the first time after they both get drunk working out the annulment paperwork.
Maybe I'm Shaft. Maybe I'm Trump. Yeah, I'm Trump in my dirty, wiggy tower.
Of course, the big new love interest addition to the series is JLB IT consultant Dobby, who will go on to essentially go on a similar 4-season arc as her predecessor Sophie. 2 seasons of awkward Mark fumbling romantic opportunities with her, only for their relationship to sour as soon as they get together when her social circle and interests expand outside of Mark's comfort zone, culminating in a desperate, failed proposal attempt in the Quantock Hills. Dobby has a reputation for being a divisive character among fans. The creative team really seems to love her, with some referring to her as Mark's true The One, and with the character essentially becoming a third main character by the time of season 8. Some don't like her for being a creator's pet, some like her for a bit but don't like her character arc where she becomes more of a hipster stereotype, some just don't like her because of how her arc ends. A big, obvious love triangle that culminates in Bain and Armstrong essentially throwing their hands in the air and unceremoniously having the character vanish like a fart in the wind. Love her or hate her, at least her introductory episode gave us that grinding in the stationery cupboard scene I find weirdly hot. I think I won't edit out that line. Would I edit out that line if I thought anyone who knew me in real life would ever watch this far into the video?
Oh yeah, they can laugh, but I win because they think I pissed myself. They've no clue I came all in my pants.
Of course, one of the main distinctions between Dobby and Sophie is that despite Mark's constant romantic faux pas, they both still put up with him episode after episode. But while Sophie could be perceived as being knowingly emotionally exploitative of Mark, an opinion her actress Olivia Colman shares, Dobby is constantly throwing herself at Mark. Literally throwing a part of herself at Mark. I do feel her eagerness to fly the Mile High Club with Captain Corrigan distances me from the relatability of Mark's relationship woes this year. A relatability that further loses me with how Mark approaches those relationships. Mark has gone from frantic, paranoid desperation to more of a pathetic, sad desperation, and personally in my dating history, I've always gravitated toward the former. Mark repeatedly forces himself into these awkward facsimiles of relationships in a pitiful attempt to escape loneliness, but will also construct elaborate excuses to not pursue kindred spirit Dobby, who's down to clown in Pound Town. Even though he likes her too. Likes her more than the other girls, in most cases. We all do stupid things when we're infatuated. I know that's the big hand wave to all of this, but the whole dynamic really muddles what's going on in Mark's mind, even as we're hearing what's going on in Mark's mind. Jeremy's arc throughout the season, meanwhile, is much more straightforward, and perfectly encapsulated in the title of episode 3. Jeremy's broke.
Mummy gave me a nest egg. I've spent it.
You ate your nest egg? You're meant to sit on your nest egg till it hatches, not eat it like some greedy, mad chicken.
Jeremy finds himself more destitute than ever this season, and begins enacting various schemes to earn himself some cash. Fighting with his family to get his mitts on a share of inheritance, loaning out Gunny, a gun he found, for various criminal antics, stealing Johnson's credit card, and selling out to a dubious band manager to secure gigs. Naturally, with Mark as his landlord, these financial woes put Mark and Jeremy at each other's throats more than ever. Mark briefly evicts Jeremy, he relishes the opportunity to withhold Jeremy's inheritance money, and he reveals Jeremy's chlamydia to Big Suze, then physically restrains him so he can't catch up with her. Meanwhile, Jeremy reveals the stepsister rape to blow up a dream job for Mark, lets burglars make off with Mark's TV, saddles Mark with a Johnson credit card debt, holds Mark at gunny point, he has sex with Mark's sort of wife Sophie, and worst of all, he's a sausage thief. Tom Wamsgans would not stand for this.
A sausage has gone! Oh my God, Jeremy, a sausage is missing!
The funniest moment of the season comes at the end of Jeremy's manager, where Jeremy trashes her caravan after being kicked out of his own band, and Mark does a single crystal skull smashing out of solidarity, even though he's dating the manager.
I could make the best of it, go for a freebie on the skull. He'll get the blame, I'll bank mate points. I'm golden. Unlucky, pal, I win.
Oh, fuck!
The Revenge of Atlantis.
Then when he gets the opportunity to get back in the band, Jeremy pins the entire trailer trashing on Mark. Another way that Peep Show goes against the grain of most sitcoms is that, instead of relishing the awkwardness of characters telling a lie, sometimes the series relishes just how outlandish and confident Jeremy's lies are. Even if he doesn't always get away with it, you can just tell all the time between the writing and Robert Webb's performance that Jeremy lies a lot.
God, how could he?
Well, he hates being told what to do in bed. He hates you for pushing me out of the band. I was like, dude, these things happen. But he was like, no! That's when he did the eggs.
Mark may not get the one, and Jeremy may not get any money, but Sophie does manage to get what she wants by the finale, even if it's in the saddest way. You might have noticed I mentioned that both Mark and Jeremy slept with Sophie over the course of the season. Well, she's pregnant, and one of them is the father. Tune into the Jerry Springer Show next season to find out who.
Is it really 50-50? Or is it, in fact, much more likely that my guys will have won the sperm war?
What?
Mine are like soldiers of fortune. Yours are probably just glad of the practice. Like, yay, we're out and we're not in the wank flannel. Mine are much more, okay guys, here we go again. This is the drop zone. You know the drill.
You might think that Schrodinger's baby is going to be the central storyline of season 6, but nah, not really. In episode 1, there's a joke that the characters literally don't want to talk about it. The boys take a paternity test in episode 2, and surprising probably no one since it would torture he and Sophie the most, Mark is the father. Mark then spends the rest of the season running away from his obligations and Sophie at every turn.
We're all having a baby together. And that's a terrifying and beautiful and very, very terrifying thing.
I cannot believe I didn't use that clip somewhere in the Jane the Virgin video. So really, the main arc of the season comes in Jeremy's new relationship with their hot pants neighbor, Elena. Peep Show has had its ups and downs when it comes to making well-characterized or funny love interests over the years. The absolute nadir coming in the final season. We discussed Sophie being well-defined after starting kind of one note in early years, but also with the angle of we're seeing through Mark's eyes what he wants to see in her before he actually knows her. Nancy was a sort of Christian twist on a hippie stereotype, Big Suze on the posh archetype, Dobby on the very real-world, nerdy outcast to hipster pipeline. All with varying degrees of questionable how much of the main character's antics would a woman really put up with. All this to say, Elena definitely lands on the lower end of the spectrum when it comes to love interests. She kind of has some uncommon sexual kinks in her early appearances, but nothing like Nancy-level outlandish. And her main characterization winds up being that she's emotionally flighty, when it turns out she's in a committed relationship with another woman, and Jez is just a side piece.
I play woodwind, she's on brass.
But Elena's betrayed you. How does it make a difference that it's with another woman?
Because it's hot.
Jeremy at first thinks that sneaking around on the side with a woman in a lesbian relationship is titillating, but quickly grows exhausted by the dynamic, the more sneaking around impacts his sex life and the more he becomes utterly infatuated with her. In fact, Elena's character is mostly defined by just how much Jez is obsessed with her, which in turn makes it sort of weird that he is so obsessed with her. More obsessed with her than he ever was with Big Suze, who he had a substantial history with, or Nancy, who he was desperately trying to uncelibatize to rekindle their honeymoon phase. So it's a bit weird. At the end of the day, Elena reads more as a love interest we can project our own romantic obsessions onto, which at the very least generates a lot of quotable exchanges.
I love you, you've got to choose.
What?
Come on, Gail's had her go, now I want first dibs. She can skulk around and you can have an affair behind my back, except you know what? No you can't, because I want you all to myself.
Going into my series rewatch for this video, I didn't realize some of the rewatch was actually just going to be a watch. When I first got into Peep Show, I didn't watch front to back. I did the thing where you sort of just hop around watching whatever episode premise sounds the most interesting. And I didn't realize I'd only ever seen the finale of Season 6. I guess past me didn't think the rest of the episode premises sounded that interesting. Well, guess what, past me? You're pretty much right. But don't get me wrong, this is still Peep Show. It's very, very funny, the jokes are well written, and the comedic delivery is on point. But from an episode plotting and structure perspective, Season 6 loses a lot of the elements that made past seasons truly shine. I mentioned that Season 3 had a lot of stock sitcom plots that the writers took in wild directions. But Season 6 is kind of just the Peep Show characters doing stock sitcom plots. A Who's the Father Baby Daddy episode. A character gets scammed by a friend's startup business episode. Character gets stuck in an apartment during an affair and has to sneak out. That one's especially notable because the following season would do the exact same premise again, but execute it much, much better. So much so I'd consider it one of the show's best episodes. There is just a straight up characters throw a party to meet women, end up embarrassing themselves at the party instead episode. It's all sort of by the numbers, with one notable wildcard. Johnson.
Good old Vista. People give it a bad press, but I'm never upgrading. Why would I? It just feels like a good pair of jeans.
In the premiere of Season 6, JLB credit goes under, and in the wake of losing his job, Johnson loses his mind, and episode 4 of Season 6 is the Johnson episode. And I mean, it is the Johnson episode. Johnson is one of the show's most beloved side characters, so it makes sense they'd want to give him a focus episode. But rather than fleshing the character out when we learn more about his personal life, the writers instead just confirm, yeah, he's completely fucking insane. It's an amusing choice. Personally, I find Johnson works best in smaller doses, but if you just want a half hour of wall-to-wall Johnsonisms, Season 6 has you covered.
Where'd Suze go?
To get milk.
But we already have milk.
I don't think it's really about the milk.
Well, what is it about, Mark, if you're the big expert?
My last complaint about the show feeling more standard sitcom-y in Season 6 comes from how Mark and Jeremy screw each other over. I think a lot of the funniest scenes and storylines in the series come from Mark and Jeremy actively betraying one another and working against each other. But Season 6 never really does that. They'll still screw each other over, but it's always an accidental screwing over, born of a farcical misunderstanding where they really meant well. And, I don't know, it's still funny, but you can get that in a lot of shows. Peep Show has always been uniquely brutal in just how hard our two best friend characters have been willing to throw each other under the bus and fuck each other over.
No, stay! You've got to help me!
Despite my complaints, Season 6 does go out on a high note. The finale is a sort of time-lapse episode as impending doom looms over both our leads. Elena gets engaged to her girlfriend Gail, and plans to move away from Jez after the wedding. Meanwhile, Sophie asks Mark to learn how to drive so he'll be able to take her to the hospital when the baby is due, an assignment he promptly procrastinates.
I could write a play in the time I'll save. Yeah, what's my play going to be about? A bloke, a genius, unrecognised in his own time. Mark Corrigan? And he loves, or maybe even hates, chips.
all roads converge on Gail and Elena's wedding day, when Sophie's baby starts to come early. With Mark still unable to drive and Jeremy drunk off his ass because it's Elena's wedding day, neither man is able to operate a motor vehicle and give Sophie a ride to the hospital, so she's forced to drive herself. Though it should be noted, despite their limitations, both of the boys certainly try.
Hello, I need your best driver and your fastest car. No, 2 hours is no good. I need someone immediately. Okay, well how about you get off your great fat anus and come and drive me yourself, you self-important hick?
I especially like what they do with Mark in the finale, what they kind of haven't been doing with the pregnancy the rest of the season. Peep Show has a running thing with Mark that he's secretly terrified of commitment and obligations to others, but then when all is said and done, he always manages to weasel out of the commitments and obligations on accident by being such a screw-up. And if there's one thing these guys are most in danger of screwing up, it's how they treat their partner in the hospital while the baby is being delivered. We'll be right there when we rush over to the hospital in Season 7.
So if you need directions or tissues or anything, don't hesitate to let me know.
Yeah, tissues and directions, good. Don't have any tissues, don't know where we're going.
Peep Show's second, third, and fourth seasons were a real hot streak, and are widely regarded as the golden years by the fandom, and I would have to agree. However, Season 7 of Peep Show is sometimes also regarded as a late series renaissance, a claim that I'm mostly inclined to agree with. In some ways, elements I've complained about are more exacerbated than ever in Season 7, but in many other ways, the show is effectively playing to its strengths. Season 7 of Peep Show as a renaissance is more palatable to me than the notion that Dexter Season 7 is a renaissance, which is a widely held belief by people who belong in an insane asylum.
They could section you for trying to section me!
If you try to section me, Mark, you'll have crossed the line and I will section you, so help me!
Look, guys.
Part of Season 7's popularity is that it is very much an event season. There's the birth of Sophie and Mark's son, a Christmas episode, a New Year's episode, and even an episode for Mark's son's christening, although technically the characters never make it to the christening and instead, screw it, we're doing a bottle episode. The day Sophie gives birth is perhaps the apotheosis of Mark's aversion to obligation, and the New Year's Eve episode is a multi-location hopping party that allows audiences to check in on multiple characters who have been making fewer and fewer appearances as the series has gone along, like Johnson, Jeff, Big Suze, and Mark's rival for Dobby, Gerard. As well as check in on the party animal himself, Superhands, who has finally met his match with the New Year's party he himself is hosting.
Look, if that party is too much for Hans, the crack-addled maniac, I'm pretty confident it'll be too much for me.
The Christmas episode in particular holds a special place in the heart of many Peep Show fans, although unlike most other television Christmas specials, it isn't because it has an additional heaping helping of sentimentality. Students of Slipmaker lore will know my television reviews began with an ultimately incomplete project called Christmas TV, where I would review one television special each day from December 1st through Christmas. Sad to admit, Peep Show's Seasonal Beatings was not on my list of episodes to cover in the project, if only because I was too intimidated by its brilliance to cover it. But now I've got 5 years of television criticism under my belt. I'm more well-versed, more articulate, and by God, I think I'm finally ready. Let's do it. So, Peep Show's Christmas. Well, it's called Seasonal Beatings. It's play on, Jez forgot the turkey, or well, it was a joke. There is a turkey, but he cooked it badly. Clumsy idiot. Dobby is Mark's girlfriend, and his dad is mean. It's a good episode. Cauliflower is traditional. This is a famous joke. Mark shreds the turkey. He shreds him. It was a Christmas present, so he shreds it. Dobby leaves Mark, but in the end, he tells off his dad, so Christmas is saved. Yeah? Okay, that was 5 years of YouTube criticism put to the test. How'd I do? Alright, in all seriousness, Seasonal Beatings' climactic Christmas meal is also hugely informative on why Mark is the way he is, when we meet his father, who has been oft alluded to but never seen. Or rather, seen only once in the background of Sophie and Mark's wedding, but in a non-speaking role and portrayed by a different actor. That's the Viggo Mortensen broke his toe when he kicked that helmet in the Two Towers, overexposed bit of trivia that no one can shut up about in the Peep Show fandom. Mark's overbearing, unloving father is quite the presence, and his antics at the family Christmas celebration shed light on why Mark would grow up to be weak-willed, financially paranoid, and have an unhealthy view that romantic relationships are entirely about control.
Dobby's gone. Good riddance to bad rubbish. You can do a lot better than that, Marco.
Well, no, actually, because she's great, and thanks to you, I'm a dick. So I was punching well above my weight.
Thanks for the segue. Dobby. Dobby, Season 7 Dobby. It's an issue I discussed previously with Sophie, but Mark is blowing it with Dobby so bad in Season 7, it's actually baffling that she gets together with him, and then even more baffling that she stays with him. The writers literally can't seem to come up with a plausible way for the two to get together, and I imagine if you haven't watched the show in a while, you might even struggle to remember how they got together. For those who forgot, or people who will watch any piece of old toss video I slapped together for my channel and haven't even seen the subject I'm covering, she agrees to date Mark if he promises to shut up about the club he and their co-worker Gerard formed that's basically just a club about liking, stalking, and sabotaging the other relationships of Dobby. Then Mark immediately begins nervously attempting to gauge if she's still interested in him. He frets over sex becoming stale as soon as they start having sex. He makes her hide the fact that she's his girlfriend from his family on Christmas for reasons, and refuses to stand up to his father being rude to Dobby until after she's left. Then he spends his whole New Year's Eve trying to track her down, crassly insults her behind her back trying to fit in with Jeff and Alan at a party, then tracks her down to another party and asks her to move in with him. And Dobby accepts. Sure, why not? Because Mark's just been hitting home run after home run this year. I get that it's a comedy series and big embarrassing fuck-ups are the name of the game, but it gets to a point in season 7 that even progressing the sitcom relationship at all becomes implausible. Probably the only thing Mark did right all year was buy Dobby a sex toy when he feared he wasn't sexually satisfying her. A sex toy which he ultimately got cold feet about and never presented to her.
Blimey.
It's a dildo. I've bought a big dildo.
Jeremy's love life, meanwhile, is much more about Jeremy fumblingly turning on the charm instead of repeatedly, violently turning it off, so the development is more natural. The current woman in his sights is Zahra, girlfriend of Jeremy's loutish new employer, musician merchandising agent Ben. Zahra is, again, not the most fleshed out love interest, mostly defined as being a cultured fan of books and independent cinema. But it works fine since the focus is primarily on Jeremy feigning that he is an intellectual as well.
I've been on the same 4 pages for 3 hours.
I see.
Mark, how do you read? Can you teach me to read?
You want me to teach you to read?
That affair culminates in another standout episode of the series, The Nether Zone, in which Mark and Jeremy are locked in the lobby of Ben's flat after Jeremy successfully sleeps with Zahra. It's a fantastic bottle episode where both men are given ticking clocks to motivate their escape. And though it does somewhat Flanderize Jeremy to like Ralph Wiggum levels of stupidity, the episode is still wall-to-wall hilarious.
It's not her, it was a man.
Try again. Try all the variations.
Try all the variations of the 5 or 6 numbers I'm not sure of.
Yeah, there can only be a few variations.
Of all the numbers?
Yeah.
Shortly after his affair is uncovered, Jeremy loses both his job and Zahra, and he's about to lose his bedroom now that Dobby's agreed to move in with Mark. But is Dobby actually going to move in? 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 There, I've just summarized season 8, so we can skip over to season 9. Nah, I'm just kidding. Let's do season 8.
He's gonna be fine. He's moving into Super Hans' party pad. They're gonna have the time of their lives. Okay.
Why did he hit him?
Shortly after agreeing to move in with Mark, season 8 sees Dobby immediately begin baking up excuses to perennially postpone the date of the move. Almost like her disgust for Mark's awkward and insulting actions operate on some sort of satellite delay. This means Mark's storylines throughout the season will all revolve around his anxious efforts to expedite Dobby's move-in date, fearing if he doesn't get it done soon, she'll wise up and won't do it at all. Meanwhile, Jeremy realizes he has fallen in love with Dobby after sneaking off with her to smoke weed during a paintball game, and spends a good portion of the season thinking about being in love with Dobby, but only gets the nerve to do anything about it in the finale. Sure, the L Dude brothers do run around with a variety of schemes and odd jobs this season too, but as far as season arcs, it's all Dobby all the time inside our main characters' noggins. Love triangles between main characters are nothing new to sitcoms, but there is an element that's new to Peep Show, and that's how the impending rift between Jez and Mark over Dobby's affections is treated with a modicum of sincerity. Like, this is finally the girl that they both care too deeply for, and when all is said and done, no matter what happens, their friendship is over.
I love Dobby, Mark. And I know it's true love because I'm prepared to sacrifice my closest friendship for it.
It's interesting, though a tad strange, because we have seen them fight over the same woman and fuck each other over before, and it was always treated as a gag. In fact, we've seen it a hell of a lot. Mark tried to snake Tony from Jez in the first episode, Jez tried it on with Sophie in Funeral, kissed Sophie in the conference, and had sex with her and Mark's women. Mark developed a crush on Big Suze and tried to have an affair with her, they both banged Jeremy's manager. I'm just saying, we've done this before. Although the added sincerity infused into the situation does make the gags in the explosive train scene where Jeremy tells Mark the truth even more hilarious than they normally would be.
So, apologies, but I think you should know I'm in love with Dobby.
I'm sorry, what the fucking hell are you talking about?
I thought it was only fair for you to know. Goodbye. Oh my fucking god, this train is running on time. This is unprecedented. Oh no. Oh, fuck.
The train confrontation is utterly immaculate, but the rest of the finale is a bit of a mess. Dobby gets a job offer in New York, so Mark wants to take her to the Quantock Hills and propose in order to lock her down. Meanwhile, Jeremy finally works up the nerve to confess his feelings to Dobby, but Mark holds off on the proposal and swears Jeremy to secrecy and fears Jeremy's love confession will play the spoiler. It's all pretty contrived. The episode is written like Mark and Jeremy are forming this uneasy truce, when in reality, Mark's competition is the New York job, and Jeremy is basically just setting a course to embarrass himself. But instead of letting Jeremy just embarrass himself, Mark hamstrings his own plan in an attempt to keep Jeremy's confession at bay. It's just weird, and leads to a weird picnic where Mark and Jeremy start fighting when Dobby realizes everything is too weird and quite literally vanishes into the Quantock Hills. And I mean, vanishes. That's a series wrap on Dobby. Well, technically, she does return in the final season in what is basically a glorified cameo. So despite the fun on the train and the fun with an electric fence, the finale can't help but leave a sour taste in viewers' mouths. If you actually got invested in the sincerity of the Mark, Jeremy, Dobby love triangle, that LOL nothing happens conclusion is a disappointment. But if you were just here for the shenanigans, treating everything like a big joke, their relationship stuff can be overwrought. Just as I mentioned that many fans consider Season 7 to be a late series renaissance, so too are Seasons 8 and 9 regarded by fans as being, not quite jumped the shark, more of a casually mention that you don't think the last couple seasons are quite as good when you recommend the show to your friends. Though of course, 8 does have its defenders. I'll go to bat for it a bit myself. The finale has some exceptionally hilarious moments, and I don't think it's the total train wreck that I've seen some fans describe it as. And the Love Bunker episode is up there with the greats. It's the episode where Jeremy realizes his feelings for Dobby, but also the main episode that shows why he likes her and why they're compatible instead of just telling us.
Ooh, the Italians might leave the euro, big wow. It's not exactly planes smashing into buildings, is it?
Yeah, that was good news. Not good news, obviously, but good news.
It was amazing news.
And on top of all that, it's a paintball episode. Even if you don't go as hard into paint as Community, paintball episodes are still usually layups. And the whole side plot of Mark being trapped in a bunker with super hands, who develops a drugged-up delirious hatred of the opposing team and evolves into a bloodthirsty commanding officer that needs to be fragged, is a goldmine.
Forget the knife. Paint his arsehole from point-blank range. What do you say?
I'd say you've moved from attempted murder to violent sexual assault, which is probably technically moving in the, quote, right direction.
Another point of contention, I imagine, is that 8 relies on the sitcom staple of characters taking up odd jobs more than any season before. Giving your main characters odd jobs is a tried and true formula. The Simpsons would never have gotten to over 700 episodes without it. But typically that premise relies on watching how the characters themselves react to their new role. Peep Show Season 8 does both odd jobs, but also odd episode premises within those jobs, and I feel like it sort of muddles the character-based gags that are ripe for the picking. Mark becomes a traveling salesman, but the gag is just, he's a traveling salesman without a car. Look how hard it is for him to get around. Nothing all that specific to Mark, just an absurd circumstance. Mark tries to publish his novel, but it's less about Mark's efforts to be a writer and the inevitable hilarity of the work he produces, and more about Gail DeCarios transparently scamming him through a vanity publishing agency, or Jeremy's aspirations to become a life coach. But his main client is just a maniac who wants to be beat up, and instead of witnessing Jeremy's furtive efforts at pseudo-therapy, Jeremy just agrees to beat him up for cash. For a show that is intended to be relatively grounded, Season 8 has a bad habit of making these situations themselves over the top and ridiculous, and therefore the joke.
Sharing a flat with a psycho. Who's that in the corner, Andy? Oh, that's my life coach. That shivering, pale man with the suitcase of porn is helping me get my life back on track.
Normally, I fear I've harped on about things I don't like in the shows I've covered too much, and people will think I'm just a hater. But I feel I brushed over this a bit, so I'll clarify. I do not like the whole Jeremy becomes a life coach plotline, which is a sad note to end the show on, because Peep Show's over, right? Well, at least I thought so when I first caught up on the series on Netflix. But little did I know that 3 years later, we would get a 9th and final episode order. Let's keep our fingers crossed that, just like with Severance, good things come to those who wait 3 years. It's on to the final 6.
How's yous?
I'm most content.
Right? That's good that you're happy.
I mean, obviously not that happy, since Dobby moved to New York.
The premiere of Peep Show's final year, after a 3-year hiatus, is a real we're back episode. Not just literally, it's been 3 years, can you believe it, we're finally back, but also after a rocky 8th season, it's a hilarious return to form in the we're so back figure of speech way. After 6 months on the outs since the Dobby debacle, Mark and Jeremy reunited Super Hans' Stag Night, deliberately goading the recently sober Hans into falling off the wagon for their own Stag Night enjoyment. Mark's anger toward Jeremy is further assuaged when he easily tricks Jeremy into taking a predatory loan at his new banking gig.
It's a credit rating especially for people like you. The terminally ill and criminals who might flee to Thailand. All you need is a reference from a landlord or a former landlord. Would you like to play
capitalism.
The episode culminates in Mark realizing that his boring new history-obsessed roommate doesn't quite match his old love-to-hate odd couple dynamic with Jez, and with the aid of hands, the trio forcefully evict Mark's latest tenant by bagging him up and slinging him out.
Shut it, or you're getting waterboarded.
Do not bloody waterboard me!
I warned you. Waterboard!
I love this episode, and as someone who waited the 30-odd months for it to drop in real time, it was a pleasant reward for my patience. But are we actually back? Well, episode 2 rolls around to confirm, no, not really. I was surprised to learn that the season's second episode, Gregory's Beard, is one of the least liked episodes in Peep Show's entire run. Like, people hate this thing. It had been nearly a decade since I did a substantial rewatch of the series, and for the life of me I couldn't recall any sort of Gregory or what sort of shape his beard took. So I just wrote it off like, oh, probably some random shit episode I never watched. I bet it sucks. If it's been a while since you rewatched the show, some of these episode titles are pretty non-indicative. Think fast, what happens when Mark makes a friend? If you said Mark befriends a neo-Nazi, you're thinking of the episode Jeremy Makes It. Who does Mark try to propose to in Quan Talking? Dobby or Sophie? Nope, not that one. Which of the El Dude brothers has a sham marriage fall apart in Wedding?
Sorry, it's the other one.
Again! You know what, pal?
So when I poke around Peep Show discourse and see a miasma of hate swirling around Gregory's beard, I just have to look it up. And then it's like, oh, the episode where Superhands gets married? The episode where Jez unwittingly outs himself as bisexual the moment he has sex with a man because he's doing it with a guy on Mark's webcam while practically every acquaintance in his life happens to be watching? Oh, right, yeah. Of course the title of that episode isn't Hans' Wedding or just Wedding Again or Jeremy's Gone Gay. How foolish of me. It's called Gregory's Beard. But unironically, how foolish of me, I remembered loving this episode on my first watch, so hearing it was widely hated years later surprised me. The scene where Jez gets caught on camera, the scene where Jez realizes he got caught on camera and everyone knows, Jez's makeshift scatterbrained wedding speech at the end. This episode's great, what are people talking about? And then I rewatched it and realized all the parts I liked were like 3 minutes of the total episode. I can see where the haters are coming from. After a pretty pathetic send-off to Dobby last season, they dragged her back for a second, even more pathetic send-off. Hans' wedding going relatively smoothly and soberly sort of wasted potential in a series where most weddings are the stuff of nightmares. And if we want to be pedantic, the Find My Friends plot device doesn't make a lick of technical sense, and the Irish actor attempting to portray Dobby's American hipster boyfriend has possibly the worst line delivery in the entire series.
I know you're stalking Dobby. I tracked your IP address. You douchebag.
Though for what it's worth, Jeremy's sexually confused wedding speech has some of the best line deliveries in the entire series to make up for it.
What's in a name? Or gender? Is it possible to love 2 people at once? 3? 4 is surely the limit.
Jeremy's revelation about his sexual identity gets us into the season arcs proper. And the shame of it is, once we're past those few incredibly hilarious and embarrassing moments in Gregory's Beard, Jeremy is paired off in the most uninspired love triangle in the series yet. Jez is fooling around with both his life coaching clients, Megan and Joe, who are complete blank slate characters, and the series seems content to coast on Jez is bi, therefore the love triangle is interesting, even if he's busy getting by with cardboard cutouts. Meanwhile, Mark's final year love interest puts at least a bit of a spark into Peep Show's endgame, even if it fizzles out a little quickly. Instead of a new girl, Mark is given a second chance with his one-off sophomore year interest, April, the history student he had a thing with back when he faked his way into university classes. 3ism, the episode that reintroduces April, is another oddly meta episode like Holiday, this time littered with referential lines to April's decade-earlier introductory episode, University Challenge.
This is my chance, and I'm doing nothing. I am now, this instant, missing my chance.
This is my chance, and I'm doing nothing. I am now, this instant, missing my chance.
We studied ancient history at Dartmouth, but that's all ancient history.
I could tell him that's all ancient history now. He probably wouldn't like that joke. Oh well, that's all ancient history now.
And from there, that's the gist of the final season. Jez is in a bisexual love triangle. Surely that will right itself, thought Armstrong and Bain, except oops, it didn't, and Mark is trying to drive a wedge between April and her distant husband Angus. He does momentarily pull it off, and again, it's a weird dichotomy of what horribly embarrassing events put women off and what horribly embarrassing events they take in stride. Mark's nightmare dinner party where he serves inedible food and cocktails while wearing makeup that disguises the I love you he wrote in his eyelids in permanent marker, not weird enough to weird April out. But attempting to avoid his ex, Sophie, who was obviously obnoxiously drunk at a children's playground, is just a bridge too far.
I mean, you could
bury the body.
I was going to say wake her up and get her a coffee, but shallow ball grave?
She's pretty much already buried.
Do you think she'll be able to breathe in her grave?
Peep Show's grand finale is another Gregory's Beard situation. It's peppered with great moments, but also infamous among the fandom. Primarily because, in the eyes of many viewers, this was the episode that took the criminal antics too far. Jeremy and Hans kidnap April's husband Angus and send insulting texts to April from his phone so April will run away with Mark. Just sort of in the hopes that Mark will win April over so much when they run away on a cruise together that she won't even mind the whole "your friends kidnapped my husband and made him break up with me under threat of torture" thing.
And it totally worked. You're back with April.
Yes, until she finds out. I mean, what's the long-term plan?
The long-term plan is sucky-fucky.
Sucky-fucky is not a long-term plan.
It definitely reads like the writers trying to go big to cap off the show with a big finale. But yeah, it's a pretty large shock to the system on a first viewing when you witness how over the top this episode goes. In contrast with Gregory's beard, this was an episode I remembered mostly disliking on my first viewing, only to find myself pleasantly surprised on a rewatch. Part of it is that I was simply psychologically primed for the over-the-top insanity, but also knowing how over-the-top the episode goes, I could enjoy the back-and-forth banter where Jeremy attempts to rope Mark into the scheme after he already enacted it.
Correct decision. There's always a dark side of love. Someone's always gonna get a little bit kidnapped.
Anyways, Angus escapes and blows the whistle on the whole plot. Jeremy loses both Joe and Megan, Hans's wife leaves him after she learns he got involved in the kidnapping plot, and Jeremy and Mark sit on the couch just as we first found them a decade earlier. I'd say we're leaving them exactly where we found them, but with Mark losing his job and the ravages of time wearing down Jeremy's party animal psychology, we're leaving them off significantly worse.
If I was gonna kill you, I'd have a great sign-off.
Yeah?
You always loved history, Mark. Well, now you can be part of it. Bang.
So that's Peep Show. There was a second attempt at an American adaptation back in 2008, this time benefiting from Armstrong and Bain serving as writers. Unlike the first American pilot, this one has been lost to time, with only lingering clips from actors' demo reels that can be loosely cobbled together. It's primarily an adaptation of the third episode of season 1, where Mark goes on a date with a goth teenager at a bowling alley. It's much more in the vein of Peep Show's sense of humor than the original American attempt, though like most American adaptations, still indulges in a more sentimental third act. Also notable to fans of this YouTube channel, the second American Peep Show pilot was an early career role for Dana DiLorenzo, who would later star as Kelly in Ash vs. Evil Dead.
The answer might be inside me, whatever the hell that means.
Look inside yourself for the answer?
Oh, sure. Now that I gave you all the clues, it's obvious.
We've talked failed US pilots a lot, and by proxy, I've alluded to The Office a fair bit. The UK Office was a pop culture phenomenon that propelled the careers of Ricky Gervais and Stephen Mitchell, all while popularizing the mockumentary format. Meanwhile, Peep Show wasn't a phenomenon, it was a companion, and not just due to how many years its run spanned. Like Jez was to Mark and Mark was to Jez, it was a companion that occasionally tortured us as we were forced to watch the cringe comedy horror show through our fingers. And by looking into their heads, we were able to look into our own heads for cathartic laughs. It's an odd show, in that to me, it's both a comfy, nostalgic watch, while also being one of the most squirm-in-your-seat painful watches. And that's Peep Show. Oh, and speaking of painful watches, I'm sorry to my audience in the UK that I referred to each season as a season, since in the UK, seasons are called series. To my American mind, a series is all the episodes that make up a show, and a season is a single run of episodes within that series. Like, how can I talk about a series, but also talk about a series within that series? It makes no earthly sense. It's just more natural to my writing style. Sorry I didn't address it till the end of the video. And if you commented something mean about me because I called them seasons instead of series, don't bother deleting it now. I already saw the horrible things you said about me and my mother.
I came here to talk to someone about this, get some perspective. Turns out I can just read the fucking YouTube comments.
Yeah, they might be good comments.
I've looked at life from both sides now, from win and lose, and still somehow it's nice.
No turkey? You fucking idiot, Jeremy! You total fucking idiot! That was your job, you fucking moron! You cretin! You're a fuckhead! That's what you are! A fucking shithead!
It was a joke, Mark. I was joking. It was a Christmas joke.